Welcome to the Blue Collar Corner. It has been a minute since I've made a podcast, so we are going to keep this short and sweet, but I wanted to get back on here and give a new update to everything that we have going on. My name is Michael Hawkins. I am the owner of Blue Collar Top Team here in Heber, Nebraska. We have a jiu-jitsu facility, strength and conditioning facility, a little bit of a recovery aspect to it as well with our sauna and cold plunge. Overall mental wellness center. I try to specialize in community outreach more than anything. So, backstory for me: why did I start Blue Collar Top Team, and what makes it special? So, when I was 18 years old, I grew up here in Heber, Nebraska, and for those of you that know me and have been around long enough, you know that I made some very poor choices as a young adult. I tend to rebel a little bit against my father for unknown reasons. Well, I guess we'll never know the answer to that truly. I think we can equate it to young and dumb. The backstory of when I ran away from home. My father told me I couldn't stay out or go to someone's house that night, and so I internalized it and decided that the best course of action was to run away from home. Totally makes sense. There was an Amber Alert out for me for about 2.5 months. Nobody knew where I was. I was spotted in Lincoln, Nebraska. Ended up being arrested. I was 17 at the time. Charged with burglary or attempted burglary for my interactions with another individual in Lincoln, Nebraska. Not one of my finer moments, not very intelligent of me at all. Proceeded to have a trial case carry on for about a year or so, and then during that time, I ended up getting a minor ticket for minor in possession of alcohol, and I determined that that was a violation of my bond. Nobody ever told me it was a violation of my bond. Again, I took it upon myself to make decisions that dramatically impacted my life, and I didn't understand the potential problems that would come out of those decisions. So I ended up being arrested and placed in Clay County Jail for theft of a vehicle. So this is the second time that I'm arrested in 1 year. I stayed in Clay County Jail for 491 days. And from there, I was sent to McCook Work Ethic Camp. McCook is no longer functioning. I believe they've turned it into a immigration detention center, which is a whole other topic. While in the work ethic camp, I earned my GED. So I got there and I was a junior in high school, I believe. I was not ready for my senior year. I was pretty close to my senior year. I don't remember how that went, but I got there, and within 2 months I earned my GED. And at the end of the McCook Work Ethic Camp, I really didn't want to do probation. So I decided that I was going to ask to be remanded back to the county jail so that I could plead with the judge and ask for a year sentence instead of serving the 5 years probation. Again, in my arrogance, I thought I knew better. And this would be the downfall of almost everything that I've done. Of course, once I got to that Clay County Jail, and again, I had served 491 days or so at that Clay County Jail, so I had the opportunity to memorize quite a bit of systems and patterns and people and all sorts of stuff. Not with the intention of ever escaping, but that was the ultimate result of what happened. So within 12 hours of my transfer back to Clay County Jail, I had in fact escaped. Now, they shut down everything within 50 miles. Schools were closed. We were considered armed and dangerous. And we were not, of course. Just a couple of idiotic kids, to say the least. The person that had escaped with me was facing quite significant felony charges. And, had he have not brought it up to me, I don't think I ever would have had any desire to escape. We were arrested a number of hours later, I would say about 4 hours later, placed back in that jail, and shortly thereafter I was sentenced to Nebraska Department of Corrections prison. and I was 18 years old at that time. So from 18 to 24, I had the distinct pleasure of being in the maximum security facility, Nebraska Department of Corrections in Lincoln, Nebraska. NSP, as it's called. Started in Housing Unit 5 because my point security was very, very low. And for those that don't know anything about Nebraska State Penitentiary, the front housing units 1 through 5 are some of the worst offenders in the state, not necessarily the worst. Tecumseh is a supermax facility. I was in just maximum security facility. But nonetheless, you know, for a guy from a small town in the middle of nowhere, this was a big, big culture shock to me. You know, there was a lot of people that, you know, this just was their life. You know, they grew up in inner city, and violence and gang related and drug related stuff was just, you know, status quo for them. I was not a violent offender. I was not a drug offender. The crime of escape, if you wanted to say who the victim is, it would essentially be myself. You know, I ended up screwing myself over, for a lack of better words. In Nebraska State Penitentiary, as I said, it was a big culture shock because there's a lot of politics in prison that most people don't think of, at least people that have never been to prison or had anybody that's lived that experience don't understand. And so you learn to grow up real fast. And one of the things that I did was isolate and figure out, you know, internally who I was, what was important to me, what I wanted to come out of that existence in prison. And it was not a smooth road. It was not a fast track. In fact, it took many, many years. But it all started with a decision that I needed to change. I wanted to do something different. So while I was in prison, I kept journals. I would meditate. I would work out. I would try to pour myself into self-betterment. My biggest challenge once I got to Nebraska State Penitentiary was the fact that I wasn't recommended any programming. Again, the escape, it's not a drug offense, it's not a violent offense, so the reprogramming, quote unquote, it wasn't there. I was just given a sentence with a prospective release date, and from what I knew at that time, if you had an escape or an absconding on your record, it was very, very unlikely that you were ever going to be given parole. And, you know, as an 18-year-old kid, that was pretty scary. I didn't know what to make of that. So I decided that I was going to volunteer for every program I could get my hands on. So I started volunteering for the Residential Treatment Center, which would have moved me back to the medium security in the back of NSP. It's a 75-man bay. Everybody's in bunk beds, you know, group showers, group day rooms, all that stuff. Ended up being accepted to that facility, and then I think about midway through that program, they ended up transferring me to OCC, Omaha Correctional Center, where there was a little bit more of an intensive rehabilitation. You go to 8-man rooms, and you attend classes every day. It's a substance abuse program. And here is really where I started to develop and grow within myself. This is where I found my love of helping other people exercise and work out. In NSP, I just wanted to work out myself. It really never was an emphasis on helping others. But in Omaha Correctional Center, I had the ability to, you know, kind of focus inward. It's a smaller facility. Ended up getting a job as an electrician's apprentice, which was the highest paid job in the institution at that time, $3.78 a day. But it was a fantastic opportunity to be able to work alongside the maintenance staff there and learn a trade, learn a skill. While in Omaha Correctional Center, I was a glorified personal trainer, if you will. I did so well working out with myself that there was always a volunteer to work out with me. And one thing that became really popular in that 2011, 2012, 2013 time period was the Insanity Workout Program and CrossFit. So I ended up getting my hands on the structure of the Insanity Workout program and led those classes. And typically in prison, you're not allowed to collect in groups of 6 or more people. But we would have the entire blacktop basketball court, probably a collection of at least 20 people. And they had their own space. They were at least 6 feet apart, had a towel on the ground with their water next to it, and we were doing burpees and that sort of stuff. So I helped a lot of people maintain focus on positivity. I helped a lot of people lose a lot of weight. That was a huge thing for me that, I started to see value out of my actions helping other people. And through my own internal pursuit of trying to do better, I was blessed to be able to help other people, like I said. I actually was able to write up the first CrossFit style competition that we had in OCC. I convinced the recreation staff to let me design 3 separate workouts that were testing parameters, one of which was 5 rounds of death. The other one was Fran. Fran was ultimately just the benchmark that they used for CrossFit, and it's 21 thrusters, 21 pull-ups, 15 thrusters, 15 pull-ups, 9 pull-ups, and 9 thrusters. So you finish it in your total time. I think my greatest time was like 3 minutes and 20 seconds, something like that. The 5 rounds of death was exactly as it sounds. It was meant to simulate a championship MMA fight. It was 5 5-minute rounds. Each minute was a different exercise, and at the end of all of that, your total reps was your score. And one of my workout partners, Jason, at the time, I believe he won with 602 reps, something like that. It's just an astronomical amount of work. There's lots of mental hurdles to go through when you're pushing for 25 minutes straight. So, while I was in Omaha Correctional Center, I really had the opportunity to redesign habits and understand, cognitive behavioral therapy. That was a big aspect of the SAU program there. And of doing that cognitive behavioral therapy, you begin to identify what are ways that I am deficient, what are ways that I am self-sabotaging, what are ways that I can intentionally interrupt these patterns to create a better outcome. And I took that to heart. Not everybody will run with the information that's given to them. I think 99% of people, maybe not quite that high, but most people will go along with the program for the sake of maybe getting an earlier release. Not many people internalize it to the degree that I did. I wanted to change significant amount of habits, and I didn't know where to start. As an 18-year-old kid, I really was not ready for the stressors that were placed upon me. So I started with a simple habit. I started brushing my teeth with my left hand because I was actually right-handed, still am right-handed, and I couldn't break down how I get from where I was to where I wanted to be. And I still have journals to this day that I wrote down that I wanted to be a multiple business owner, that I wanted to open a gym, that I wanted to do all kinds of things that I currently do to this day. I had no idea how to get there. It didn't make logical sense. And if I told you that story while I was incarcerated, you probably wouldn't believe me because there's no tangible way for me to prove that I can get from point A to point B. So for me, I was like, okay, well, what if I start at the goal and backtrack to the simplest thing that I can do and start to build from there? And at the time, I was reading Tony Robbins, Awaken the Giant Within. And in that book, I think it was reintegrating yourself, or neuroassociative conditioning was the chapter that made me think, okay, I need to associate pain to this moment in time, so that way in my brain later on, it's not a happy-go-lucky time. Meaning, during my incarceration, I'm not sitting around talking about the good times that I had, laughing with people. I'm actually focused on the things that are painful about this situation. I didn't communicate with 90% of my family for 5 years. I didn't talk to my mother at all. I didn't talk to my sister. I didn't get to see my niece's and my nephew's birth. there was many opportunities and many moments of family life that were completely missed because I didn't take the opportunity to do the right thing. And that was painful for me. So I internalized that. I tried not to comfort myself. I didn't buy a TV while I was in there. I didn't buy tennis shoes. I tried not to spend a whole lot of money at the store because I wanted it to be an uncomfortable scenario. I wanted it to be associated in my brain permanently as a painful situation. And I thought that that may help me stay out of prison. I didn't know. None of this was proven. There really is no proven way to stay out of prison other than redesigning who you are and what you do. And at the time, again, I was a young kid. There was no tangible way for me to have access to information that showed that I was right or on the right path. I just followed my heart and my intuition, and that's always been something that I've stuck with and has done very well for me. And then eventually, once I graduated that SAU program, I was allowed to go to work release. From work release, I managed to get a job at Subway. This Subway was 5.5 miles from the work release center itself. So I would ride my bike, take the bus, and work and come back. And eventually, after about a year or so of doing that, I was given parole. While on parole, I had a fantastic parole officer. Came back here to Hebron and was told, that as long as I didn't rob a bank, I was not going back to prison. That was very specific terminology. And fortunately for me, robbing a bank was never on the to-do list. So, while on parole, I dove into my love of mixed martial arts. I had started mixed martial arts before I went to prison when I was 17. At the time, the closest place that I could train was Hands to War Mixed Martial Arts in Crete, Nebraska, with Jeremy Small, Charlie Dubray. Jim Small was Jeremy's dad. There was a couple other guys, I don't remember their names, but Jeremy and Charlie, I remember them. Charlie because he took advantage of me not keeping my left hand up repeatedly. I remember one day specifically having to run to the bathroom and get tissues and stuff it in my nose and come back. And I was a little hard-headed at that time, and again, the arrogance before I went to prison was something that contributed to my issues and shortcomings. Now, back to the release. As soon as I got back here to Hebron, I started applying for college. Actually, before I was released, I was discussing things with the college wrestling coach at Wayne State, Gregory Vanderweil. Greg went through an immense amount of effort to get me to attend that college, and I greatly appreciate it, even though I didn't stay at the college to wrestle there. I ended up taking an MMA fight in Liberal, Kansas, and pursuing mixed martial arts. My issue at that time was that I was a 3-sport athlete, trying to be a 3-sport athlete. So I played rugby, and I wanted to be on the wrestling team, but I also wanted to do mixed martial arts. And Greg, posed a challenge to me, and he said, "You got to pick something." And so I did. I ultimately picked mixed martial arts, and I wouldn't take that back for anything. So my first fight, I drove 10 hours, got paid $40, fought out of my weight class. It was really not the smartest entrance into mixed martial arts, but nonetheless, I was pursuing my passion and what I wanted to do. Then I got a second fight, and that was with OFC, Omaha Fight Club, under Tim Baser. I took 3 more fights with that promotion, I believe, 3 or 4, can't remember. And then I think midway through trying to make things work in Lincoln, Nebraska, obviously I bounced around here a little bit after release, trying to do all the right things, sometimes falling short, putting myself around the wrong people again, and realizing that to be a bad pattern and a bad cycle. And on my 3rd MMA fight, I met my wife, Christy. And at the time, she was with somebody else, and that individual wanted to train, and so I ended up training with him. And I was always very, very respectful of their relationship, just because I didn't even look at her like that. I was one of the boys, so that was his problem to solve. And through spending time with them, I just saw how much of an asshole he was to her. So he ended up going to jail for assaulting her. He took a phone and smashed it over her face, and from that day forward, her and I were always together. And we decided shortly thereafter that we needed to get away, that we needed to go do something else. And so we moved to Florida. And now this move was not logical, was not well thought out. Anybody that believes in doing things that are too risky, or not doing things that are too risky, would have said, don't pursue that. We loaded up our two-door Honda Civic with everything that we owned, all of our possessions, and drove to Florida. When I got to Florida, her family worked for the court system, so had access to information on backgrounds and that sort of stuff. So before I even got there, her parents knew who I was thanks to the judicial filings and court system. And so my first conversation with her father is about why I escaped, why I went to prison. And as you can imagine, that didn't really set a good tone for the beginning of our interactions. But I remember telling Chuck, and Chuck ended up becoming one of my best friends, and he's since passed away, unfortunately. But I remember telling him at the time, a little bit of hard work goes a long way. And little did I know that that would resonate with Chuck very, very greatly. So while I was in Florida, we lived outside at a family property, which was a ranch out of town, outside of Fort Myers. And when I say lived outside, I'm very serious about that. We lived outside, open to the elements. We were under a roof, if that makes any difference, but we nonetheless lived outside for about 6 months, until Christy really got tired of trying to put on her makeup in the middle of July, and no quicker than she could put it on would it droop down her face. Florida humidity is very serious. The temperature does get pretty hot, and it's constantly humid from 7 a.m. on. I ended up getting a job at Superior Surfacing. At Superior Surfacing, they specialized in pool deck renovations. Pebble Flex at the time. Pebble Flex is an EPDM based product that is placed on playgrounds and splash pads and kids' play areas. Ended up getting very good at troweling, installing, mixing. It's a two-part epoxy binder that holds together that EPDM and creates a resilient layer, so slips and falls are less impactful than a water play area that has just concrete. So if you were to slip and fall on this EPDM, you're a lot less likely to injure yourself. And so especially on playgrounds where we install a sub base, it's about 4 to 6 inches or so. Now, while I'm in a full-time work cycle, I decide that I'm going to apply for college, and I get accepted to Everglades University in construction management. Pursue that construction management for 3 years. Ended up getting 97% of all my credits before I ran out of federal funding, and did not end up completing that degree, but to this day I have 97% of that degree. But I did that for 3 years, and I was working for other companies at the time. Went to Specialty Surfaces after that, where we traveled to Disney World, Universal theme parks, the East Coast and the West Coast of Florida, Pensacola. We worked at the Air Force Base up there in Pensacola a few times. Was blessed to travel to Tennessee and Texas to install Miracle League fields, which are, again, the EPDM product, but it is a full baseball field. So the outfield itself is 12,000 square feet, just massive, massive surfaces. These were Miracle League fields, which were made for children with disabilities, so special needs, that they're able to also play baseball and softball and have fun. And you push the wheelchair, and mud doesn't build up in the tires. And if they slip and fall, then it's at least it's on a soft cushion kind of a layer. I meet a lot of people during this time, and as I told Chuck in the beginning, a little bit of hard work goes a long way. Little did I know that that would become the motto of my life. So I would say about 3 years into working for these people and pursuing my college degree at the same time, I realized by county standards, I have the necessary experience required to become an independent contractor. Here's the only problem. In Florida, becoming an independent contractor is much more complicated than it is here in Nebraska. In Nebraska, you just file some paperwork and ta-da, you're a contractor, which is the most asinine thing I've ever heard, because there's no stopgap to try to prevent people who don't do good quality work. Now in Florida, you can become a contractor, but you have to file a 10-page application, number one. Number two, in that 10-page application, you have to have 2 people that you've previously worked for with supervisory experience sign off and say that you did good work for them. Now, if you're a terrible worker, this is never going to happen. You have to produce results, be likable, and be able to convince these people to allow you to become their competition. Luckily, I had a couple friends at the time, and they were totally willing to do that because I had always produced, always showed up, and done a really good job for them. And like I said before, a little bit of hard work goes a long way. I ended up going through a very long process. At first, I was denied for my construction license application, and they told me that my past didn't have anything to do with it, but I really strongly believe that that was just kind of like a way for them to make peace with telling me no. And then I consulted with a construction attorney there in Fort Myers, Kevin Drzezinski Law Firm. Got to work with one of their lawyers and ended up drafting up, out of this 10-page application, we provided 75 pages of supplementary evidence to show that, yes, I was responsible enough to operate said company. And yes, I did have the necessary startup funding to be able to make it successful. And ultimately, through that process, they ended up awarding me my contractor's license. And then from that point forward, I started operating as Rhino Coatings LLC. One of the biggest things that I focused on because of my mentors in the industry of epoxy coatings was training and betterment and continuing education. And so I overemphasized those things. And I've always been a sole proprietorship, so I've always, taken on the contracts myself. And contracting is, as it sounds, there's a lot of documentation required for tracking and administration purposes. So again, always been a sole proprietorship. I wear many, many hats, from material procurement to estimation to the final closeout, installation. From time to time I would hire people, but very rarely have I ever been able to make someone work for a long period of time. Only one person has ever done that, Edward Gonzalez down in Florida. Shout out Ed. Probably one of the best workers that I've ever had the pleasure of working with, and I ended up meeting him at Concrete Science when I was hired as a subcontractor there, and he was stuck on my crew. Ed is a very good guy, and he's willing to learn and willing to work and apply that same philosophy of a little bit of hard work goes a long way. Ended up, my father-in-law and I took on a remodeling project in Fort Myers, purchased a house, and decided we were going to pour in some funding to renovate. And I think Chuck's philosophy was at that time that he wanted to give his family a way to fish, not give them fish. Now, if that makes any sense to you, Chuck was a contractor himself. He started as an electrician contractor and transitioned to a general contractor. Now, during that time, he had always wanted to pass on that skill, but he had two daughters, and they were not interested in accepting that skill. Um, Now, when I came along, he saw an opportunity to teach how to fish. And again, I was a contractor, but I was just a specialty surface contractor. I was not a general contractor. This is something I didn't really have experience with. So, over the next couple of years, Chuck mentored me and taught me a lot of things. And unfortunately, midway through that renovation process, Chuck passed away. He had pancreatic cancer and went in remission, and then went in for a simple surgery, and the bile duct ended up collapsing as they were trying to move the stent, and it was not long thereafter that Chuck passed away. But I, one of the last things that I said to him was I made a promise that I was going to continue, and that I was going to move forward and make sure that all of his efforts were not for nothing. So that's kind of my story of how I became a general contractor. We ended up living at that home for 5 years as I finished up all the construction, interior, exterior. We sold at a much higher value than what we purchased, and then my son was born in 2019. When Donovan came along, it was really kind of an eye-opening situation to me, because now it's not just creating a good life for myself and Christy. Now it's creating a good life for a young man, and I knew that there was a higher importance. I started training jiu-jitsu right before he was born, right after he was born. I don't remember how that played out. I believe it was right in 2019. Ended up training at Cali Style MMA under Justin Del Rio. It was an amazing gym for the purpose of what I needed. I needed that pressure-based jiu-jitsu. I didn't need the one size fits all, or this is for everybody kind of jiu-jitsu. I needed very high pace, high pressure jiu-jitsu, and I found a lot of that at Cali Style. So I poured into that. I would show up early. Again, I'll go back to this phrase: a little bit of hard work goes a long way. I'd show up an hour early and do some solo drills, make sure that I'm warmed up, and then at 7 o'clock, 7 a.m., everybody else would show up, and we'd go through class, and I'd probably be there till 9:30 or so. And this was really the advantage of being an independent contractor, is I got to set that schedule, and I was able to make training such an important part of my life. Then I decided that I really wanted to pursue mixed martial arts, but I didn't want to go about it the same way that I did the first time. The same way that I did the first time was nonchalant, didn't care about training. There was no importance to making sure that I did all of the things, and I just wanted to get in there and fight. My arrogance out of prison thought that maybe just being tough would be enough to win. And it took a couple very skilled opponents for me to realize that that's definitely not how things play out in the sport of mixed martial arts. So instead of going about it with little effort, this time I was going to pour all the effort that I could. And the entire year of 2021, I would say I spent way more money than I should on training. I would travel back and forth from the East Coast to the West Coast, which is of Florida, which is about a 2.5 hour drive. So I'd drive just north of Miami and go to Daru Strong Performance under Phil Daru. Phil Daru at the time was Dustin Poirier's head strength and conditioning coach. Right as I was signing up, Dustin was getting ready for Conor McGregor 2, where Conor broke his shin. I walked in the door, and inside of the ring, working with Derek Santos, was Vitor Belfort. So there was always high-profile individuals there, and I felt like just being able to be a fly on the wall and be in the room and observe these people was worth the time and worth the value. I work out there with my personal trainer several times a week and go through strength and conditioning aspects that drastically improve my jiu-jitsu and make it to where I can receive my blue belt. And I wouldn't say record time, but it was a fast timeline from the time that I started to the time that I earned my blue belt. I attribute a lot of that strength and conditioning to that because, most people don't take their sport that serious, but if you do, you can make some pretty cool things happen in a short amount of time. So it ends up happening that I apply for an internship at Drew Strong Performance and end up being accepted for the internship. There would be times where I would sleep in my truck outside of the gym. So I'd drive 2.5 hours there, do my training session that day, sleep in my truck. Keep in mind, this is Florida. It is not comfortable to sleep in a truck. And then the next morning, I would do another training session before I leave. So that way I could get the most return out of my time there. Sometime through that, I ended up being able to touch base with Carlos Arredondo, who is a professional boxer working under Derek Santos at that time, and was blessed to be able to learn the sport of traditional boxing from Carlos, who is a through and through old school pugilist. Just one of the best coaches I have ever been able to work with. And you easily recognize when you don't have a good coach. And now that I've had that, looking back, I understand how hard it is to find such good coaching. I worked with Carlos all the way up until 2023, the end of 23, when we decided we were going to move from Florida up to Nebraska. Now, we ended up selling that home that I discussed earlier and purchasing a home up here in Nebraska. And of course, in Hebron, it's a town of 1,200 people. There's really not a whole lot of a population here. So, I really, really missed the aspect of being able to train, especially the aspect of being able to train with high quality information and equipment and ability and that sort of stuff. So I searched around and I tried to find gyms that were near me. I would travel to Kearney, which again is about 2 hours. I would travel to Lincoln, which is about an hour and a half. And I did that for a year and ended up teaching jiu-jitsu out of my 2-car garage at my home with some puzzle mats that I had. And we had 3 or 4 guys. It was just enough for us. There was no air conditioning in there. It was just guys who needed it at the time. And one of those individuals is still with me to this day. So then, I started coming up with this crazy idea that I wanted to open a gym. Again, this is one of those cases where I had no tangible proof that this is something I could accomplish. But I believed in my heart and I followed my intuition that I could produce the results. So a little bit of hard work goes a long way. I started pouring into the business plan and the data points and started figuring out, okay, how many students would I need to support this? Can I make it happen with a population of 1,200 people in this town? Is it possible? Well, with a radius of about 45 minutes around here, yeah, it is possible because I would only need 0.1 to 0.3% of the population to support the gym. Ended up discussing some things with the bank, and they agreed that the data points were accurate and that the potential impact to the community was good. And so I was presented with 2 different things here. Do I pursue expanding my construction business and try to provide value to the community in that aspect? Or do I take this endeavor on of opening a gym, not just opening a gym, but purchasing and building, gutting it, rebuilding it, and installing all of the equipment and making all of this stuff happen as a sole proprietorship, as single owner operator? Now, as you can imagine, that is an immense challenge in and of itself. Well, long story short, here we are today. We have a 4,000 square foot facility. It took a very long time to get to this point, but now we have close to 30 members. We have a youth kids class that teaches learns Bang Muay Thai, our little ninjas, and then we also have kids jiu-jitsu. We have adults jiu-jitsu, we have adults MMA, and adults Muay Thai. We have a ladies strength and conditioning class. We have a men's 7 p.m. Bible study group. we are slowly building into something that is going to be extremely beneficial to the community. And for me to be the same person that was that 17-year-old kid that ran away from home, escaped from jail, went to prison, and decided that he wanted better for himself and better for his community, and he wanted to do and be better, and then moved to Florida for 10 years and completely redesigned every thought, every habit, every idea, every notion. And then to be able to come back and provide this much value to the community has been an extremely humbling experience. So the choice of blue collar top team was fairly obvious. Everyone around here nearly has a blue collar job. We have a gym of a fantastic group of guys growing every day. There's really no room for ego in this room. We're all here to develop and get better. And I've been fortunate enough to, partner with some very, very good people. Dan Miller with Omaha Police Department. I've been training with him fairly consistently. And so we're starting to explore some avenues there that we can continue to expand and develop more for the community. Specifically, we have a law enforcement only seminar coming up in July, on July 12th, where they focus on weapons retention, teen tactics, vehicle extraction, those sorts of things. So again, another way to provide immense value to the community. Dan came down sometime earlier in the year and provided a seminar for self-defense. So we had a ladies group that participated in self-defense, had a couple kids there, and a couple police officers. And so now, moving forward, we have some really cool opportunities for the community, and one of which is Dean Lister. For those of you who don't know who Dean is, ADCC world champion, just one of the best guys to implement jiu-jitsu into not only mixed martial arts, but the world stage. 84% submission rate. The boogeyman, he is a leg lock master, trains out at Victory MMA in San Diego with Jocko Willnick. Just an incredible opportunity to be in the position to where I can bring Dean Lister to Nebraska at all, let alone a 1,200 population town. Just an immense opportunity for everybody that lives around here. So that's one of our upcoming events. Last year I hosted a seminar for the Thayer Central Elementary School and High School. We didn't get as many high schoolers as anticipated. Unfortunately, I believe there's a little bit of stuff there that I couldn't have foreseen, but hopefully this year we will get more high schoolers, because we have a Division I wrestler, NCAA qualifier, Big Ten 4th place finisher, LJ Araujo, 5-time state champion. This kid's a stud. Him and Liam Cronin and Caleb Smith, all Division I wrestlers for the University of Nebraska, came down last year and provided an excellent seminar, and it was just an amazing opportunity, again, to give back to the community. So there's 2 of our upcoming seminars, LJ and Dean Lister, then Dan Miller for the law enforcement seminar, and traveling back and forth in the Bang Muay Thai affiliates. I've made a friend, Ryan McDonald. Ryan has fought for LFA and UFC. He's got to start here in Nebraska. He's going to come down and give a 4-day intensive MMA camp. So that's in August. That's another amazing opportunity for people. We've got so much lined up here that it's just such an honor to be in this position, to be able to utilize my skills and strengths and for good, for betterment of the community, and to make that turnaround. And here's the point of all this. It's not just a self-glorifying story, because ultimately none of this is for me. I love it, and I feel in my heart extremely fulfilled, but at the same time, this is about me providing, me being a servant, me being in a position of leadership and utilizing the skills that God has given me for betterment to others, and trying to, make the community a little bit better. Um, so I think that there's a lot of people out there that struggle in some way, right? Maybe you don't screw up your life quite as drastically as I did. Maybe, it's just simple. Maybe you screw up your relationship. Maybe you screw up your job. And maybe you do go to prison or do go to jail. More people need to hear that redemption is possible, but only if you deeply internalize it. And you can't just believe that it's possible. You have to put action behind it. And then you have to take risks. And most of the time, these risks are not going to be logical. When I moved to Florida, I had $126. We barely made it to Florida. We almost ran out of gas on the way there. I had to live outside for 6 months. There was no guarantees whatsoever that anything would ever work. Never. There was never a guarantee that I would become a contractor. There was never a guarantee that I would be accepted to build this facility. There was never a guarantee that I would be able to make it work for Dean Lister to come here. There was never a guarantee that I would ever be able to train at Omaha Police Department with some amazing people up there. There was never any guarantee. But I believed in my heart that I could make it happen, and I put enough action into it to produce the result. And I did not stop when the logical side of my brain said, this is not going to happen. No, I believed it. And I believed through immense effort that good things would be produced. So that is the story of Blue Collar Top Team. I'm extremely humbled to be in this position. I'm extremely humbled to be able to provide this value to the community. And I'm very, very excited about what the future holds. So that's all I got for you guys today. That is the introduction of Blue Collar Top Team. Hopefully I didn't take too long. A bit of a 50-minute episode here, but I'm going to try having some very cool people on the podcast here in the future. We're going to discuss some cool topics. We may end up recording one of our men's groups one of these days where we discuss verses in the Bible. We discuss ways that resonates with us, where we try to implement that in our own lives and figure out how to be better protectors, and better providers, better servants to our community. So that's all I got for you guys today. Thanks for joining in. If you made it this far, please hit the like, hit the share button, and I will see you on the next one.